Hello, honored guests, beloved friends. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this presentation of Star Trek Into Blackness, brought to you by the good folks over at Women at Warp. My name is Lieutenant Commander Kennedy Allen, and I will be your personnel officer for the evening. Thank you, folks, for joining us once again. If you have been keeping up with our programming thus far at Women at Warp this entire month, we've been focusing on what I like to describe as the Cosmic African Diaspora. It sounds a little complicated, sounds a little new. Don't worry, we're going to get into all of that. Before we get started, I just want you all to know that we will have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. So please feel free to throw your questions up there if you want. I do have a moderator. Our Admiral Sue will be keeping an eye on all of your comments. But if you have anything pressing, feel free to take note and then throw them in the chat at the end there. I am obsessed with Black folks in Star Trek, and this is the most constructive way I can think of to, share that obsession. And I thank you all for joining me this evening. So we're going to jump right into things here. I just want an opportunity to show off my graphic design skills and all my Lacarsness. So it's really good. Let's go to our first slide here. All right, then our second slide. Cool beans. I just wanted to tell you all a little bit about our group here. And this will be Women at Warp, your favorite feminist Star Trek podcast. We are a groundbreaking bi-weekly show committed to examining Star Trek from a feminist perspective, exploring what we like to call intersectional diversity in infinite combinations. We have a rotating crew of 7 fabulous hosts who I'm sure you've gotten to know thus far. And if not, don't worry, we'll be here so you can get to know us then too. Tune in from everything from episode and character analysis to history of women behind the scenes and in fan culture to discussion of larger themes and messages throughout the franchise, such as this one, which is a major thing that I think most people are gravitated towards Star Trek with, which is the representation of folks within it. One of the things that was a challenge the first time I did this panel, if we can pop back up to my face a little bit, was at the time back in 2016, there were only 4 series to choose from, a plethora of contributions from Black characters and Black actors therein, but it was really just 4 people. Cut to nowadays, or 4 series worth of people, I should say. Cut to nowadays, where we have more series, more different platforms, and more representation therein. So at this point, we're going to get an opportunity to sit back, buckle up. If you have some sorry and brandy or anything, no judgment. Make sure you have that handy, because we're going to go through the space Negroes, as I like to call us, or as I like to say professionally, the Cosmic African Diaspora. So let's pop back out to our main screen here. Let's focus on everybody's favorite space boomer, Travis Mayweather, with the rank of ensign. As we all know, the NX era was an exploratory time, really kicking over boundaries and overcoming obstacles left and right. Unfortunately, the series couldn't overcome the obstacle of producers and network stuff, but we did catch a little bit of a glimpse of what it was like to be a pioneer during that time. In Mayweather's case specifically, he was one of the first generations of human beings born in space. So if we can take a minute and imagine what his family must have gone through, delivering a baby in space on a cargo freighter, no less, must have been harrowing, but especially at a time before Doc could just wave a light over it. So you really want to take a minute and reflect upon the lifestyle that his parents chose for him and the lifestyle that Travis chose for himself. If we remember episodes of Star Trek Enterprise, we'll recall that Travis had a little bit of a rocky relationship with his brother after his father had passed. There was a lot of guilt for leaving the family and joining Starfleet. And it took his mother, shout out to moms, took his mother to remind him how proud of him she was for being the first in the family to join Starfleet, and for being the first pilot on a Warp 5 capable vessel. So shout out to Travis Mayweather for holding it down, even if we didn't get too many lines there. Next up, we have the one, the only Commander Nyota Uhura, serving as a communications officer, not only aboard the USS Enterprise, but also at Starfleet Academy as a professor. We can go down her stats here. I have them listed for you to take a gander if you choose. One of the biggest things that I feel is overlooked about Uhura's contribution, not only to the ship of the Enterprise, but also to Starfleet in general, is the fact that she was a communications officer on one of their first long-range missions. You know, obviously want to give credit where credit's due, and Hoshi Sato being the first really architect of the universal translator, but it was Uhura that was able to put all of that to the test when it came to that long-range mission. We often saw her dealing with a whole bunch of nonsense whenever the Enterprise fell into dismay. She was not only responsible for monitoring incoming communications to the ship itself, but also intership communications as well, which, as we look at it, doesn't seem like a big deal. But back in those days, in the 2200s, that was a bit of an undertaking. And she was also left at times to do her own repair work, which makes sense. Right? You're working at your console for most of the time. You don't want some red shirt up there messing around with your wiring and such. We later on saw the impact of Uhura not only in the alternate Kelvinverse universe, but in the films as well. So shout out to our Freedom Star, Lieutenant Commander Uhura. Next up, I've got Geordi LaForge here. Everybody's favorite Reading Rainbow Bay, stationed on the USS Enterprise D, later on E, with the rank of Commander. I want to give Geordi a shout out, not only because he's portrayed by LeVar Burton, who's everybody's favorite person ever, but also because he was the first character, main character, I should specify, that was depicted with a disability. We all have gotten so accustomed to Geordi's visor as it being part of his face that we tend to forget that the character could not see and elected not to have optical replacements at an early age because of all of the tactical advancements and advantages that his visor provided him. But I wanted to make sure in this presentation that I presented him with his ocular implant so we can see Geordi in all of his gloriousness. Hopefully we will see from Geordi in Star Trek Picard. That would be nice, since we're pulling out all of Picard's all homies. The least we could do is see his engineer that kept his ship running through all types of BS. Shout out to Geordi for the tuck and roll, as I call it. The most action-packed engineer I have seen on a starship to date. Hopefully that will change, because it was lit. Next, we are moving on to Lieutenant Commander Worf, the first Klingon admitted and graduating from the Starfleet Academy. Worf, I think, out of everyone that we will have collected here, is probably the one with the biggest resume. You'll see that not only did he serve on the USS Enterprise, but he later became the XO, the strategic officer on Deep Space Nine during the Cardassian and Dominion conflict. After that, he moved on to be Federation ambassador to Khotnosh, which is a bit of a double-edged sword, mainly because of everything that Worf had to endure leading up to that point. Just a brief history on Worf, because anyone that knows me knows I can go on for days about this guy here. But it was because of his family's involvement with the Klingon High Council and his influence during that conflict, during the Klingon Civil War, that Worf was put in a difficult position in terms of choosing between his heritage and his career, which is something that most Black folks have had to make a decision about in some case or another at some point in their lives when it comes to their dedication to their profession and their devotion to their culture. In fact, because Worf made the decision to participate in the Klingon Civil War, it kind of put not a damper on his relationship with Picard, but it definitely helped to define that relationship, because after that conflict was completed, Picard did call Worf back to office. He did, of course, resign, which enabled him to do that, and then picked up his commission once that conflict was over. But making that decision to quit your job, to quit your life's work so that you can help out your brother and reclaim your family and make sure that your heritage, your culture your society doesn't descend into madness, is a decision that I'm sure wasn't taken lightly. And even though it was resolved at the time, later on, Worf did have to make a decision. I'm speaking particularly to when Kalar was killed. Kalar was brought on board to help mediate between the change of power between Duras and Gowron back in TNG. And when Duras killed Kalar, of course, Worf had the right to kill Duras because, Klingon mating rights and things. So while within Klingon infrastructure, he was clear, right? He did everything that he was within his rights to do. As far as Starfleet and Picard was concerned, it was a bit of an overstep there. So Picard put a letter of commendation, or whatever the hell it's called, in his record, so that he could never advance past the rank of lieutenant commander, which is a sin. It is a shame, a crying sin, because who knows what type of adventures, what type of missions Worf would have been suited for in that captain's chair. We got to see a glimpse of that with the Defiant. That's where his quarters were, and he was first officer on board. But as far as exploratory missions and seeing what Worf could have been capable of as a captain, I feel like this franchise is sorely lacking on that, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to rectify that in the near future. I'm all on board for a Captain Worf show. I don't know about you all. Next up, we have everybody's favorite Space Dad. And we've got several Space Dads at this point in the Star Trek continuum, but I think it's safe to say that Captain Benjamin Lafayette Cisco is everybody's favorite. He was assigned reluctantly to Deep Space Nine and then onto the USS Defiant. In researching Cisco again for this iteration of this presentation, I was surprised to discover that Cisco's original passion was in ship design. So when you think about his influence in the construction and the design of the USS Defiant and the other Defiant class ships that came after that, it really makes you wonder what type of career path he would have been on had it not been for the loss of his wife, Jennifer, at Wolf 359. For those of you who are familiar, I'm sure you all recall that he was ready to throw in the tapes, or the pips rather. He was ready to call it in until he was assigned to Deep Space Nine to help the Bajorans get on their feet and salvage that raggedy, dusty, crappy behind Cardassian space station. He was the commander-in-chief there, if you want to use those terms, and was later promoted to captain in the fourth season, which was surprising in terms of, Star Trek hierarchy. In the past, we had seen admirals and commodores in in command of space stations. So whether it was the fact that Starfleet trusted a commander with Deep Space Nine, or that Starfleet didn't feel a promotion was necessary to appoint Cisco to Deep Space Nine, is up to headcanon, right? I'm sure you can fill in the blanks there however you choose. But thank God they stationed him at Deep Space Nine, because Ben Cisco was dubbed the emissary of the prophets by the Bajorans, so he became a religious figure. Who knew, right? What are the odds of that? You get stationed at a job you really don't want, and then blam, you're a messiah as well. It's like, okay, this is cool. I just came to raise my son, but I guess we're doing this. He also is responsible for making first contact with the Jem'Hadar and several other Gamma Quadrant species. He was made the adjutant to Vice Admiral William Ross during the Dominion War, and was forced with making loads of difficult decisions during that time. One of the most notable I can think of is when he tried to fraudulently enlist the Romulans into the conflict by issuing a data chip or a data stick rather, that had been forged. And he deleted the record, so it's not on his Starfleet record officially. So, no court martials there for that one. But it's definitely one of those rough decisions that one only makes when placed in positions of power, like Ben Cisco. Shout out to his son, Jake, for keeping him on track and helping him develop into the captain that he was. And I particularly want to shout out Ben Cisco for overcoming his prejudices. And I'm speaking about the friendship between his son, Jake, and Jake's best friend, Nog. If we look at early episodes of Deep Space Nine, we remember how prejudiced Ben Cisco was against Nog and Ferengis in general, and really was in the way, or tried at any rate to be in the way, of the relationship that was developing between Nog and his son. It wasn't until Jake's sweetness overcame Ben's kind of bitterness there, and when Nog became confident enough in his abilities to demonstrate what type of character he was, what type of person he was, that later influenced Ben Cisco's recommendation that Nog go into Starfleet Academy, the first Ferengi to do so. Shout out to Aaron Eisenberg for such a tremendous performance as Nog, first of his name, first of his house. I wish Ferengis had last names so I could give him one. Moving on, we have my child, my niece, my space loins, Beckett Mariner, with the rank of ensign, serving upon the USS Cerritos, as seen in Lower Decks. Now, as you all know, we've only had one season of Lower Decks. It does not follow the same format as previous series that we've grown accustomed to. So not only do we not have a lot of time to go over her career, as it were, in terms of how much they've actually shown us, but we also don't have the ability to take context clues as we would from other series, because, as again, Lower Decks is just a completely different show, which I personally enjoy quite a bit. The fact that they've switched up the format, so to speak, just to keep us on our toes. And speaking of keeping us on our toes, Beckett Mariner, the ultimate overachiever gone wrong, growing up with two high-ranking parents in Starfleet, I'm sure influenced Beckett's ability to excel at the Academy. And at some point, hopefully we will learn this for the next seasons of Lower Decks. Something snapped, and Beckett was like, nah, I don't need rank. I don't need command. I don't want the responsibility. I'm going to chill here in the Lower Decks. I'm going to, chill in my buffer time. I'm going to play with these blast shields and hide these batliths and Romulan nails wherever I can tuck them away on the ship, because this is my mom's ship and she's not going to kick me out the house. Which is tremendous, because when you think about that level of rebelliousness from Beckett, it's been just unprecedented from everything that we've seen out of Starfleet up until this point. You also have to take into consideration how conscious of the Federation's impact and lack thereof that Mariner was. Most of her infractions aboard the Cerritos, if they weren't goofing off, was her doing humanitarian efforts for underdeveloped societies that happen to, exist under the Federation. Shout out to Will Nien, Beckett Mariner, the most class-conscious Trek character to date, and you are not wrong, my friend, because Beckett is all about clearly rolling up her sleeves and getting her hands dirty. We did see a smidgen of what Beckett is capable of over the course of season 1 of Lower Deck so far. She is essentially like a Black Ops badass who is entirely too skilled to be stuck behind a console. And it makes me wonder if we need to have a branch of Starfleet where people like Beckett have a chance to shine. I don't mean Section 31, all that shady shit. I mean the stuff that's on the books that, we can trust and depend upon. I'm sure that would make her mom happy. Captain Carol Freeman, who is also assigned to the USS Cerritos. And it's important to note that the Cerritos is a starship specializing in second contact missions. Now, we always hear about first contact and how important it is to make a first impression and to explain the Federation and Starfleet in all ways that make it shiny and appealing to people. But what's about that next step? What happens after we've made that introduction? What happens after we've established relations? How do we help these people? How do we get them what they need? Who follows up with them? And apparently there's a whole section of the fleet that is devoted specifically to that. Carol Freeman strikes me as a person who has worked her entire ass off her whole life and is tired of being overlooked, and her achievements kind of downsized despite how much effort she's put into them, which I'm sure a number of Black women and other marginalized groups can relate to when it comes to really striving to do well in a professional environment. The relationship between Carol and Beckett is singular, and I find it immensely fascinating because probably because of my own personal reasons, me and my mom kind of have the same relationship as Captain Freeman and Beckett Mariner, in that, you know, Carol demands excellence from her daughter because she knows she's capable of it and has seen evidence of it, and is really frustrated that Beckett's just kind of skating by and chilling and still doing great things. And Beckett, having all of the, you know, benefits of growing up in a Starfleet household, being a Federation brat, if you will, and is just choosing to forge her own path. So I'm excited to see how Carol and Beckett can work together to start redefining the Federation in ways that Beckett has been studious enough to point out. I would be remiss if I did not mention that Carol Freeman, voiced by Dawn Lewis, is nominated for an NAACP Image Award this year, as well as the rest of the show of Lower Decks. I don't think there has ever been a Starfleet character, a Starfleet actor, or a show that's been nominated for an NAACP award. So I'm just saying, we all thought that maybe Deep Space Nine or Disco were the blackest treks, but it might be Lower Decks, depending on how this award ceremony goes. Either way, I'm thrilled for it. Moving on, we've got Lieutenant Commander Rafi Musiker, who I feel is one of the most tragic characters in Starfleet. Again, Star Trek Picard has only had one season, so there's not too much in the way of backstory for Rafi. All we know is that Homegirl was the foremost analyst on Romulan affairs. She's also a veteran Starfleet intelligence agent. So that talks back to that Black Ops stuff that I mentioned before. When you think about how secretive the Romulans have been historically, it kind of fills in the blanks on what it takes to become an intelligence officer specializing in Romulan affairs. I'm sure Rafi has fallen into the looking glass several times over in trying to find information not only on Romulans themselves, but also how to help orchestrate the evacuation of Romulus after the attack on Mars. We will find out more about Rafi as we move on in this series, hopefully. I hope we get more flashbacks because she looks lit in this uniform, and I just live for every second of this image. One of the troubling things about Rafi that is interesting and also slightly problematic is the fact that they chose to include substance abuse with this character. From a personal perspective, right, as a Black woman, seeing this Black woman struggling with substance abuse, it was very jarring for me. I did not appreciate the fact that, you know, the one Black woman, the one Black character in this series is, you know, strung out on something or another or struggling with addiction. But I had to take a step back and realize that I was reacting from a perspective of a lack of representation in media, in that for years and years and years and years and years outside of science fiction, the only time we saw Black and brown actors is if they were portraying, you know, criminals or people who were struggling with substance abuse and all types of elements of society that we have deemed to be undesirable. But when you take a step back and realize that these people are still people and still deserve, you know, all access to basic human needs, housing, education, healthcare, all that stuff, it begins to validate characters who aren't squeaky clean like we're accustomed to. So I had to deal with my own prejudices and realize that Rafi being portrayed as somebody who's struggling with an addiction doesn't make her less great of an officer. So I challenge you all to think about Rafi in that way. I know that's been a big thing among Black women trekkers. We've all kind of been like, why she gotta be strong out though? And I think Rafi serves to remind us that everybody deals with their adversities in different ways. And, you know, hopefully we're seeing that Rafi's getting back on track with doing good things and is not being judged by her extracurricular activities. We'll put it that way. I just wanted to linger on this image because Michelle Hurd looked bomb in this uniform, I gotta say. Moving on to USS Discovery. Now, I know a number of you were like, well, wait a minute, this has been chronological. Where are the disco kids? Because of the recent jump in time, spoiler alert to those of you who haven't caught up on season 3 of Discovery, you might want to look away now because I'm getting into this. As we all know, the ship, the USS Discovery, was in action during the 2250s. So they predated Kirk and them in the original series. But they went through space and time because they're amazing and ended up in the 32nd century. Lieutenant Junior Grade Ronald Altman Bryce being one of them. He served as the communications officer and was a veteran of the Klingon Federation War and was one of the crew members that elected to stay on board to follow Michael Burnham into the future in a way to avoid letting Control get hold of the precious sphere data, which is really great. I'm going to linger on this photo as well because I couldn't find many other pictures of Bryce that you could see his whole face and nothing but his face. So you're just going to have to get this back and just a little bit of butt, just a peek of the cheek there, peek of the cheek. Peek of the cheek. Moving on, we have Dr. Tracy Pollard, who I love the fact that it's on Discovery. It's not just the chief medical officer that we see a lot from. It makes me feel good to know that there's not just one doctor on that sick bay, and that there are several capable professionals who are able to do it. Dr. Pollard has the rank of lieutenant, and of course, as I said, is assigned to the USS Discovery. She was one of the other crew members that elected to stay on board and go into the future. Your girl, Dr. Pollard, has healed everybody from human beings to Terrans to Kelpians to space cats, and has done it with grace and dignity. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Raven Dauda for sliding into this role so effortlessly and making it seem like it's so natural that she was a part of this crew. And honestly, the amount of stuff that the crew of Disco has been through, they deserve one or two good doctors. Which brings me to, I think, the crowd favorite, I would say, of Star Trek Discovery. If we had to pick one of the other cast members, one of the supporting crew, to be a crowd favorite, it would probably be Joanne Oshikon. Oshikon. With the rank of Lieutenant Junior Grade, she was stationed upon the USS Discovery as the operations officer. And as a kid coming up watching Trek, I figured the ops people were just kind of there to keep tabs on things. But it isn't, for me at least, until we see Discovery and see how integral OO is to the operations of that ship. Much like in the way that Commander Uhura was responsible for communications coming onto the ship and off the ship, but also inside as well. OO was aware of everything going on at once. One of the most notable things about Oshikon is the fact that she, like Travis Mayweather, didn't come from a Starfleet esque family. In fact, her situation is probably a lot more severe. You know, she grew up on a Luddite colony and, you know, grew up without science, without religion, and, was a child of the planet themselves. So I can only imagine what her family must have thought when she said, "Hey guys, I'm really good at this. I'm going to go micromanage a starship. Okay, bye," and then didn't come back. Oshikon has been the breakout favorite of the series. I gotta say, shout out to Oyin Olajido for an amazing performance. I just need a Oshikon Barbie. Thanks. That's all I want. I really just want an Owo Barbie. And I'm pretty sure that other people would buy it, especially if you put out the Mirrorverse ones. Oh my goodness. All right. So last but not least, we have Captain Michael Burnham, who was assigned to the USS Discovery after a tumultuous beginning. As we all know, Michael is a trauma survivor. She not only survived an attack by the Klingons, but also grew up in an emotionally stagnant household on Vulcan. Sarek and Amanda did their best. And we see that as evident by their overachieving children. And I include Cybok in that, even though Amanda didn't have anything to do with that. But all them kids was out here doing the most. All of them. Cybok was going to the center of the universe, trying to find God and shit. Spock was reuniting long lost genetic brethren and going back in time to save some whales and doing all that stuff with Kirk and them. And then here we got Michael, who upset everything that Starfleet had established for itself. I am a staunch advocate for Michael during her mutineer phase. The only reason why that conflict happened was because Starfleet didn't have the appropriate protocol on how to deal with Klingons, not because your girl Michael decided to take things into her own hands. I feel like she was made a bit of a scapegoat during that whole ordeal, which can be a little bit it stings a little bit to see a Black woman thrown under the bus like that, in just in general, but also in Star Trek as well. And it kind of set the tone for Michael's atonement, for lack of a better term, for the next 2.5 seasons. Michael did everything she possibly could to overcome the stigma that had came along with her and her decision-making process. If we think about what happened in season 3, your girl, I just want to give Michael her flowers. She flung herself into space several times so far over the course of her career. We saw early in the first season where she didn't have a suit at all and just flung herself across space so she could get to a safer part of the ship. We saw her in a suit in the beginning of the series where she rediscovered, I should say, the Klingons. And then when it came to avoiding control with the sphere data, your girl flung herself into time and space, no ship, no shuttle, just a suit that she built on the way to the launch site, which is some incredibly smart shit to do, right? I don't know about you all. I could maybe build the suit. I could maybe be flung into time and space, but I'm not going to be able to build the suit and get in it and go into time and space like everything's cool. Who can do that but Michael Burnham? Once we get to the 32nd century, she's instrumental in reorienting Starfleet's ideals and the Federation's ideals with connection and its original purpose, which is connecting people across space and time and culture and language and religious and affiliation and gender expression and all that fun stuff. Michael became not only the heart, but the soul as well of Starfleet, and it had lost its way until they had resurfaced. She found love along the way, not once, but twice. Only the finest men from Michael Burnham. She only gets the cutest space boys, and was able to not only assert herself with her crew, but she acclimated herself to a new century without her crew, and was able to save them time and time again. She was incredibly selfless, incredibly devoted to the overall mission, and many times at the sake of her own safety, and is probably one of the characters that has received the most vitriol since hitting the air. For some reason, people just can not grasp a person like Michael Burnham doing all these crazy things, but they can grasp people like Jim Kirk doing all these crazy things. I could speculate as to why. I think we can all pretty much speculate in that same direction, but shout out to Sonequa Martin Green for portraying Michael Burnham with dignity, grace, glamour, humility, and humor as well. And shout out to Cosmic Protective Styles here. I'm loving these braids. Now, one of the things that, well, not one of the things, but the biggest thing that is the huge driving focus behind a panel like this and any other presentation where we're discussing people from marginalized communities in popular media is that representation matters. When you don't see yourself represented in media or content that you consume, it's been shown that it can have damaging effects to self-image, self-esteem, and how one is able to occupy spaces where they have not been previously. So there are hundreds, if not millions of children at this point, younger people, younger generations who have media, not only more media than myself, people of my generation or before had, but they've got all this access to stuff where they're seeing many, many different types of people in all those different intersections represented in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes it's awesome, sometimes it's not, but you are still seeing people represented that you haven't seen before. It might seem a bit overkill for us to be talking about it to this point, at this point, but I can only think of how many things I would have felt capable of had I seen myself represented in that type of situation through media, not just through Star Trek, but through anything else. And I'm sure there are many other folks from different marginalized groups who feel the same. And to be honest, many other marginalized groups are still trying to get this type of visibility. So it's important to focus on this kind of stuff because the impact is immeasurable. For example, as we bring out to the screen here, we have Dr. Mae Jemison pictured with Nichelle Nichols. Now, as we know, or if you don't know, I don't know how, but Dr. Mae Jemison is the first African-American woman in space, and she credits her love of space and exploration to watching Nichelle Nichols as Uhura in Star Trek. We all know the story about how Dr. King convinced Nichelle Nichols to stay on the crew. She was kind of on the ropes about whether or not she would stay, and he had to let her know what kind of impact that she was leaving during these episodes. So much so that here we have Dr. Jemison going into space because she saw herself in some way, shape, or form in space. Now, of course, astronauts are not a monolith. They're unable to just go into space by themselves. There are teams and teams of people, scientists, engineers, technicians, the whole spiel, involved in making sure that these people are able to go into space and survive. One of those folks being Sharon McDougall, pictured here with Dr. Jemison. Sharon McDougall was tasked with making sure that Dr. Jemison's suit was right. And at the time, there weren't female sized or shaped astronaut suits. So she was tasked with not only making sure that she could find a suit that could fit over Dr. Jemison's hips and her curves, but also so that it was tailored properly so that there wouldn't be any issues on re-entry. So there was a huge undertaking there that she kind of had to build on her own because there was no format for it prior to it. Of course, Sharon McDougall got into space exploration and wanting to get involved with it because of watching Nichelle Nichols on Star Trek back in the 60s as well. So this impact has been felt across many different planes for many different reasons and for many different people. And I just think it's incredible that, just one example, one character has managed to influence so many others to do great things, not only in science, but also in other forms. For example, my mom grew up watching Star Trek and went into communications on the heel of it. So it's really important that we note not only who these characters were, but also who their actors were and how that impact can influence future generations, whether they're aware of it or not. So we could pop back out here. I have rambled long enough. That's 40 minutes of straight talking. Do you have any questions? Holy cats, you're absolutely right. I just noticed I left out Tuvok. That's wild. So, I did leave out Tuvok. I don't believe this. I'm incredibly disappointed in myself. Tuvok was the first depiction of a Black Vulcan that I had ever seen. I can go over his stuff real quick, though, because I know what I'm talking about. Tuvok was dealing with his own prejudices as well. There's quite a couple instances of this theme here. He served on the USS Excelsior, really joining Starfleet because his parents forced it on him. He didn't want to join Starfleet, but they had held it to such high regard and pressured him into doing it. That he went on that mission and decided to quit because he had such an aversion to human beings and all of our BS. So Tuvok quit, went back home, raised a family, and realized that he had to come to terms with his own prejudices and joined Starfleet again. Of course, he went undercover as a Maquis agent and helped get the Maquis. Well, I don't want to say help get them anywhere, but he definitely was influential in getting to the bottom of one of those operations, which of course landed him on the USS Voyager, which should have been a wham bam, thank you, ma'am, let's go home trip. But of course, we know it took them the next, too many years to get back from the Delta Quadrant. He was an advisor first to Catherine Janeway. They were good friends before he was assigned to the mission of bringing in the Maquis. So when they were rejoined, I'm sure that made Catherine feel a whole lot better about things. In fact, Tuvok was so influential and his relationship with Catherine was so influential that Janeway, after getting everybody home, was so dissatisfied with Tuvok's condition that she went back in time, hacked the Borg again, and brought them back a little bit sooner so that he could be healthy and whole when he got back home. So thank God for strong friendships. Tuvok is also a great example of how stressful it can be dealing with folks in your workplace that you don't particularly care for. I'm talking specifically about Neelix and Neelix's just refusal to acknowledge and respect the boundaries that Tuvok established in their working relationship. I also want to point out the Tuvok Bop, which some of you might be like, what is a Tuvok Bop? If you go back and watch episodes of Star Trek Voyager, every time there's a conversation where there's a handful of officers in the same place, whenever Tuvok leaves, depending on how confident he is in his contributions to that conversation, he hits you with a bop. You know, Catherine will be like, dismissed, and he goes like this and just leaves. It's never just a turn, pivot, walk away. He's always got to hit you with a bop there. So next time you go and watch Voyager, check that out and you won't be able to unsee it. Sorry. Not sorry. Now, I did see something in the list here about Dr. Colbert. I elected to leave that one alone primarily because there's no real distinction in this context of the story as to whether or not Colbert identified as Latinx or as Afro-Latinx or what. I was confident of leaving him in the Afro-Latinx category so that we can focus on him when we do a presentation on Latinx representation or lack thereof in Star Trek, because he's a perfect example of it. If we do another version of this and, you know, Wilson Cruz proclaims that he does consider himself to be of Afro-Latinx descent, then absolutely I will throw him in here as well. Because to be honest, I did want to throw in Dr. Julian Bashir because Siddig El-Fadil, or Alexander Siddig, is half Sudanese, even though the character is South Asian. So there are some things that we can, you know, kind of revise and revisit as things go on. But I want to remind everybody that we need to do that carefully, because sometimes that can lead into blood quantum, which is a touchy subject and not really appropriate within the confines of a conversation like this. But thank you for pointing that out, Sylvia. I do appreciate it. Did anyone else have any other questions? I expected there to be more than this. Doesn't look like there are. So that's cool. Hopefully you all have enjoyed this. I have enjoyed putting it together. As I mentioned before, when it was just, Enterprise, the original series, Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine and Voyager, it was easy to collect all of these folks and run through their dossiers. And obviously there were years and years behind the series themselves. So we had a little bit more background information on the characters. But now, over the course of this month and compiling all of the blog posts I did with the episode that I had with my co-host Elisa and also Kara Mahorn and Angelique Roche, there's a lot of Blackness in Star Trek now. And that's why I had this panel labeled as a celebration, because before it was an exploration, right? I had to go out and look and make sure that there were elements of Blackness that were represented throughout the series and really kind of have to dig deep. Now we're at a point where it's not as clandestine, and it's really warming to know that new fans and future generations who watch this will be able to not have to dig as much as I did, and as much as the rest of us had to as well. So I'm incredibly, incredibly pleased that you all have joined us this evening. And there you can check out these links here down at the bottom, so you can see more of the work that we've done so far. And just real quick, I want to, because I don't think I clearly defined it in the panel itself, but I have clearly defined it in a blog post. The Cosmic African Diaspora is basically the idea, the concept that Blackness can exist across species, race, and time. And I make the distinction between race and species primarily because of the Romulans. We've seen in Picard that Romulans have two distinct races. There's the northern folks with the bumpy foreheads, and then the southern folks, which look more like Vulcans, I suppose. And we've seen both groups of Romulans portrayed by Black actors. So when you think about Afrofuturism and the concept of seeing Blackness represented in future settings and how impactful that can be to present folks of African descent, seeing members of the diaspora not only as human beings across space and time establishes that we do in fact make it to the future, but also seeing different species of folks who were highly melanated lets us know that we're not an anomaly, that Blackness transcends humanity and our immediate little perception and bubble of ourselves. So, hopefully there will be other people who will go back and look at older episodes and look for some characters portrayed by African-American actors, because most of them have tremendous careers behind it. So it really is just the gift that keeps on giving. Here's a great question. Do you have any comments on the characterization of Klingons played by Black and white actors? I always noticed that the Chancellors seem to be played by white actors. That's an excellent question, Richard. I'm glad you asked. Okay, so here's the deal. Here's my ballpark theory on why Worf and Kurn and the House of Mogh are some of the most tragic people in Klingon history. Because you're right, Richard, when you look at the Klingon High Council, before Worf stepped in to clear his family names after Duras tried to slander it, everybody was portrayed by a white person. So it makes you wonder, was the High Council so quick to disavow the House of Mogh because he was the only Black council member? Or was it just strictly in the interest of preserving peace throughout the Empire? We'll never really know. But it kind of leads towards that. In past presentations of this, people have asked me, well, is Worf actually Black? I would say yes, because they went so far as to cast a Black actor to play his brother. I'm speaking of Tony Todd as Kurn. We never visibly saw Kurn sit on the High Council, but we know it was a big deal. The fact that Kurn had attained a captaincy and a ship in a feudal system, a feudal social structure like the Klingon Empire, is impactful as well. I gotta say it, like, I feel like the House of Mogh was excluded because of the fact that not only excuse me, did Mogh unearth what Duras was fitting to do with the Romulans, but also it was exclusionary. It was decided erasure, I would say, more than exclusionary, because Worf called him out on it afterwards. And the Chancellor, it wasn't Gorkon. Oh, geez. Kim Peck was like, you're cool. You've got your Federation pips. You've got your comfortable behind ship. Like, what does this even matter to you? Which, as a Klingon, why would you say that to somebody? If your whole point of your social structure is honor, dignity, and imperialism for all sake and for all intents and purposes, why would you get on somebody's case for trying to maintain the integrity of that empire? It's kind of rough. There's another question here from Peter Heisler. Do you think Captain Cisco's role in the Dominion War was path-breaking? Absolutely. Thinking of, we can all see this here. Are there other examples of Black characters in mainstream pop culture leading or coordinating wars or military campaigns? That's an excellent question. I'm sure there are. I don't really watch too many military war crime drama things. But I will say, within the scope of Trek, the captain of the Earth Defense Force was Captain Ndoye, who was a Black woman. So maybe there's something to be said in that. Shout out to that scene and how she dragged the Enterprise, or how she dragged Disco the first time she saw it. So who's to say? I feel like any type of representation of Blackness is helpful, primarily because Blackness is not a monolith, right? No culture is a monolith. There's going to be nuances, there's going to be complexities, there's going to be intersections all throughout any culture or organized group of people on the face of this planet. So the way we avoid tokenism is by including people within these marginalized groups regularly. If we normalize their appearance in these collections of people, that it won't be so spectacular that we see them. You could still, have pride and feel great about seeing yourself represented in something that you're watching. But if you see more and more and more of yourself, that one character is less scrutinized than everybody else, because there's representations of it. One of the reasons why it's so cool having not only Michael Burnham on Discovery, but also Dr. Pollard and also Oshikon, is because these are three different women who have three different experiences and three different ways of going about solving problems. So we don't have to look at one of them and use her as the blueprint for how Black professional women would deal in a space crisis like they've had to deal with. I think it's there's probably other examples, to answer your question, of Black folks in positions of power in the military. And even if there's not, there's plenty of people serving now in positions of power where even if they're not being represented, they still exist, which is what matters most, I believe. Cool. So if we don't have any other questions, if you have any questions for me specifically that you were a little too shy to put in the chat, no judgment, feel free to hit me up at kennedy@womenatwarp.com. I will be more than happy to go over that because this is my jam. I've been obsessing over it for a month. So if you want to obsess more about it, by all means, please hit me up. As always, you can find more from Women at Warp at womenatwarp.com. You can find us on all the social medias at Women at Warp. Please like, subscribe, comment to all the social things that you see from us. We really appreciate the interaction. If you follow us on iTunes, please make sure to rate and leave a comment. That matters. That matters. So on behalf of the crew of Women at Warp, thank you so much for joining us, and stay Black. Live long and prosper, y'all.